In this section, we'll talk about OSPFv3 protocol. Like if you remember, in case of IP version 4, we have some OSPF protocol. We call it as OSPFv2. Now, OSPFv2 is a protocol which is designed for IP version 4 implementations. Now, when it comes to IP version 6, we have something called OSPF version 3. Now, the concept of OSPFv3 is exactly the same as OSPF version 2. Like if you take the concept of areas, dividing the areas, area 0 should be at the backbone. Or if you take any other designing considerations, or if you take any advanced OSPF configurations like virtual links, summarizations, or OSPF stubs concept. So technology wise, both the protocols are exactly similar. Now, based on the OSPFv2, we have some enhancements where it is going to distribute the IPv6 prefixes and it is going to run completely over IP version 6. Apart from that, you have some extra specific attributes added to this. It's a 128-bit address and it supports linked local addresses, and also you can have some multiple addresses on the same interface, which is not possible in case of IP version 4. And we can also have some multiple instances of OSPF running on the same interface. And then authentication, OSPFv3 also supports authentication just like v2 supports, but here we have IPsec authentication. Now if you remember, in case of OSPFv2, it supports clear text authentication as well as it supports MD5 authentication. We have something called IPsec inbuilt authentication method here. And then OSPF runs over a link rather than running on a specific subnet. Now, which means we are going to run the OSPF directly under the interface, not on the subnet, which means we don't use network commands here. Instead, we enable the protocol under the interface just like we did in a previous section in RIP. So let us try to get into the configurations. What configurations we need to do if you want to configure OSPFv3. So I'm going to take some routers, very basic configuration. Here you can see I got my router here. I got two routers, the same two routers which I used in my previous labs, and I just designed them in different areas. Now the concept of areas is exactly the same. Area 0 should be at the center, and any non-backbone area must connect to area 0 in order to exchange the routes between them. Now here also what I did, I configured the router 1 LAN interface in area 10 and the router 1 WAN interface in area 0. And similar way, the router 2, both the interfaces belong to area 10. Now if we are doing the same thing in IP version 4, we generally go to router OSPF1. This is the command which we use to enable the protocol, and then we generally configure the router ID, some router ID. So the router ID concept is exactly the same in IP version 6 also, we'll see that. And then if you want to advertise any network, we generally say network, whatever the network, and then whatever the wildcard mask we need to give, and then we have to give area and area ID, nothing but area number. This is what we do in OSPFv2, nothing but IP version 4 OSPF protocol. In case of IP version 6 OSPF, that is OSPFv3, we got similar kind of commands, but there's a difference here. Now we need to know the new commands, how we configure OSPFv3 in IP version 6. So the first command, we need to go to config mode, just like we do router OSPF1. Here also we need to use IPv6 router OSPF1. Now this command is more equivalent to this command. So here we just give router OSPF1. In case of IP version 6, we need to give IPv6 router OSPF1. And then once you give this, you go to the router mode. Here also we get into the router mode. Now inside the router mode, again here also we have a concept of router ID, and that router ID has to be given in the IP version 4 format only. Now this is something we need to remember here, because normally if we take about router ID concept in IP OSPF in IP version 4, by default router ID can be given manually. That is the first thing, in case by using a router ID command. In case if you do not configure the router ID manually, then it is going to take the highest IP address, that is IPv4 address of the loopback interface. If you have multiple loopback interfaces, it's going to take any of the highest loopback as a router ID. And in case if you do not have a manual router ID and there is no loopback interface, it's going to take the highest IPv4 address of the physical interface. Now in case of IP version 6, that is in OSPFv3, the concept of router ID is also same. it still uses the IP version 4 address, which means even though we are using IP version 6 OSPF, but the route ID just identifies a name. So it doesn't make difference whether you're using IPv6 or IPv4, but still if you use question mark after this, you'll see the route ID must be in IP version 4 format only. And the concept of route ID is exactly the same what we have learned in IP version 4. So this is something we need to remember. And then once you get back, exit command will take you again back to the configuration mode. Now to advertise the interfaces. Now in our scenario, I want to configure OSPF on router 1 on the LAN interface F0/0. So I need to go to the F0/0 interface. So I'll be in the interface mode. Now inside the interface mode, this config if mode, we need to give a command called IPv6 OSPF1, because I'm using process ID 1 here. And then we need to define this specific interface will be advertised in which area as per the diagram. It has to be area 10. That's it. So now this command is more equivalent to your network command. That's what, if you remember in the previous slide, I discussed that OSPFv3 runs over a link, not rather than running on a subnet. So here we are not advertising on the subnet, but instead we are going to run that specific protocol under the interface, under the link. So that whenever you configure this command, automatically whatever the IPv6 addresses configured under this interface will be advertised automatically in area 10. Now similar way, what is the other interface we are using? Interface S1/0, the second interface S1/0, we need to say IPv6 OSPF1, and then area, what is the area we are supposed to advertise as per the diagram? It has to be in area 0, so we need to change the area number. Now if you see the configuration of IP version 6 OSPF, that is OSPFv3, it is something new, because the route ID concept is still the same. The way we advertise is totally different, but when it comes to technology like the designing in the areas or any of the specifications, like it's a link state protocol, it's the same features what we have learned in IP version 4 OSPF. Let us try to quickly implement this lab and verify on the router 1 and router 2. So I got my routers pre-configured with IPv6 address. If you just check back, I can see here router F0/0 is configured with FC0011, exactly the same, and S1/0 is pre-configured with IPv6 addresses. And if I give show IPv6 protocols, just to verify whether I'm running any other routing protocol or not, I'm not running any of the routing protocols. So in case if you are continuing with our previous topic which we discussed, IP version 6 RIP-NG, now probably you need to remove that RIP protocol before you move on with OSPF. So here I just started my topology, so there's no routing protocol running on router 1. Let me just confirm on the router 2 as well. You can see show IPv6 protocols. I don't have any of the routing protocol running here. So on the router 1, I want to give show IPv6 unicast routing, because the routing I didn't enable, so I'm just starting my devices for the first time after assigning the IPv6 addresses. So we need to say IPv6 router OSPF1. Now once you give this command, you can see here the message here. It says OSPFv3 process ID 1 could not pick the router ID. Please configure the router ID manually. Now what's the meaning here is, now by default whenever you configure OSPFv3, it will try to take the manual router ID. In our scenario, we did not configure any manual router ID up to now. Then it is going to try to take the highest IPv4 address of the loopback. So which means if I give show IP interface brief, there is no IPv4 configured in my network. I don't have any IPv4 running in my network here. So I just took, there is nothing, you can see there is no single IP address, there is no loopback, there is no physical interface as well. Now it will try to take the highest IP of the loopback. In case if there is no loopback, in that case it will try to take the highest IPv4 address of the physical interface. Now in my scenario, these three things are not possible because I don't have a single IPv4 address running on my router. Now in that scenarios where it is not unable to pick the router ID, then it will give a message, a warning message saying that it is unable to pick the router ID. Please configure it manually. That's what this message says here. So OSPFv3 could not pick the router ID because of there is no IPv4 running in your network. So in this kind of scenarios, whenever you see that message, it becomes mandatory for you to define the router ID, because without router ID OSPF will not work. And then advertising the interfaces. What are the interfaces? As per my diagram, I need to go to router 1, interface F0/0, IPv6 OSPF1, and then area 10. Now, similar way, interface S1/0, IPv6 OSPF1, area 0. Done. So if you want to verify show IPv6 protocols, very useful command. Now you can see I got S1/0 interface in area 0 and F0/0 interface in area 10, and there is no redistribution running here as of now. I'll go to router 2 and I will try to do the same thing. IPv6 unicast routing, IPv6 router OSPF1. You can see the same message here, so it becomes mandatory for me to manually configure the router ID, and then interface S1/0, IPv6 OSPF1, area 0, and interface F0/0, IPv6 OSPF1, area 0. Done. So I just configured on the router 2 both the interfaces in the same area, that is area 0, as per the diagram. So this is something very basic lab. Now even you can try some advanced OSPF labs just like we have in IPv4. You can try those things. If I try to verify show IPv6 protocols, I can see both the interfaces on an area 0. So the first thing, whenever we configure OSPF, the first thing we'll try to verify the neighborship, because if the neighborship is up, then only you can expect the routers to exchange the routing updates and communicate with each other. Now I can see the neighborship between router 2 router 1. You can see the output is exactly the same. Now only the difference is we give IPv6 OSPF neighbor, and to verify the routing table we need to give show IPv6 route OSPF. Now you can see the LAN interface of the router 1 is getting into my routing table as OI route. So whenever you see OI, O represents OSPF routes, OI represents OSPF inter area routes. And if I try to ping to the router 1 LAN interface, I can ping. If you want to trace, you can trace. It's the same thing. So this is the way we configure IP version 6 OSPF. Now whenever we configure IP version 6 OSPF, the main thing we need to remember is the router ID. This is one thing we need to remember. The router ID has to be in IP version 4 format only. It's always the best practice to give the manual router ID, and then this command is more equivalent command, except this IPv6 is something we need to add before. And then instead of network commands, we enable the protocol under the interface. That's it. So whenever you enable the protocol under the interface, whatever the IPv6 addresses present on that interface will be advertised into OSPF, whatever the area you mention. And again, when we are using the areas, you need to keep in mind area 0 should be at the backbone. If you want area 10, area 20 to communicate with each other, they should go via area 0. And in case if there is something not there, then you need to use virtual links, etc. Everything is same like what we have done in IP version 4 OSPF.